In a world strained by geopolitical fault lines and where trust is becoming a rare luxury, just one missile can shake an entire continent. A single explosion, a plume of smoke rising from the desert, and instantly the global strategic chessboard shifts. What was a threat yesterday has now become today's grim reality. And amid that whirlwind of chaos, one familiar region, the Middle East, once again erupts in flames. Ladies and gentlemen, when Israel launched an airstrike all the way to Yemen's Ras Isa port, no one expected it to mark the beginning of a full-scale campaign. But then came more attacks. Hypersonic missiles fired from Yemeni soil streaked toward Ben Gurion International Airport. Images of panicked crowds, sirens wailing in the dead of night, and on the other side, Iran's Evin prison engulfed in flames. It all played out like a never-ending nightmare. This was no longer a warning shot. No longer a threat. This was war. And the name Israel gave its campaign, Black Flag, was more than symbolic. No retreat, no compromise. But what sends a chill down the world's spine isn't just the war in the Middle East. It's what might come next. While the United States stretches itself thin, supporting Israel and reassuring its Gulf allies, halfway across the globe, Chinese forces are conducting amphibious drills near the Taiwan Strait. Meanwhile, in Europe, Russian troops continue to hold the front lines, poised to escalate the conflict. A terrifying scenario is beginning to emerge, a two-front war. One front in the Middle East, where the Iranian nuclear fuse burns ever shorter. The other in Asia, where Beijing has never hidden its dream of reunifying Taiwan by force. And if both fronts ignite at once, it won't just be a test for global powers, it will be the death knell for the post-World War II world order. A moment when every rule of deterrence, every international commitment could collapse in an instant. That's why in today's video, we won't just recap the developments. We'll guide you through each detail, from Israel's surprise strikes, the Houthi hypersonic counterattacks, to the daring assault on Evin prison, and beyond, to the shadowy coordination between China and Russia. Each event, seemingly isolated, is in fact a vital link in a sophisticated chain of strategic movements. And to begin, let's return to where it all started, Operation Black Flag, where Israel chose not to wait for an attack, but instead took the offensive, to hunt down threats before they had the chance to emerge. Operation Black Flag was not a routine response. It was the result of months of mounting pressure, of warnings long ignored, and of a nation far too accustomed to living on the edge of red lines. Israel, with one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks in the world, and a military strategy sharpened over decades, never acts on impulse. When they strike, it's because the target has been deemed intolerable. And this time, the target wasn't in Gaza or Lebanon, as usual. It lay further south, along Yemen's coast, facing the Red Sea, where civilian ships had been seized, maritime routes disrupted, and missiles launched from Houthi-controlled territory posed an immediate threat. 3 locations, Hodeidah, Aslif, and Ras Isa ports, critical links in the Houthi logistics network, became the campaign's focal points. Israel didn't target densely populated areas. They went straight for the heart of the supply chain, and they struck with deadly precision. What's notable is that the campaign was launched just hours before a US-brokered ceasefire was set to take effect. A move that seemed risky, but in truth was a calculated strategic play. Tel Aviv had no intention of getting dragged into endless negotiations, where each ceasefire simply gave the enemy time to reload. They wanted to send a clear message: don't assume Israel will always play defense. If necessary, we'll strike first. A prime example was the attack on the ship Galaxy Leader, a new symbol of state-sponsored maritime terrorism. The ship had been seized by the Houthis weeks earlier and turned into a propaganda tool, a political hostage adrift at sea. When Israel blew it up with a precision strike, it wasn't just retaliation, it was a deliberate move to slam shut the door on negotiations. Israel didn't want the Houthis gaining leverage. They wanted the game to end on their terms. But Operation Black Flag runs deeper still. It marked the opening move in a coordinated effort between Israel and its allies, chief among them the United States. Though not officially acknowledged, the signals were unmistakable. American destroyers moving closer to Yemeni waters, behind-the-scenes meetings between defense officials of both nations. Yet each side has its own interests. Israel seeks to safeguard its territory. The U.S. aims to maintain dominance in the Gulf theater. That's what makes this campaign more than just an airstrike. It's a launch pad for a new strategy in the post-nuclear deal era. The problem is, when one side strikes first, the other won't stay silent forever. Immediately after Israel's thunderous assault, the Houthi forces, widely seen as Tehran's proxy in the Arabian Peninsula, issued a shocking and terrifying message. They didn't just retaliate. They claimed to have used a brand new hypersonic missile called Palestine II to directly strike Ben Gurion International Airport, the beating heart of Israel's civilian aviation. And in that moment, the world was stunned. How could a militant group surviving in a war-torn, fragmented region under heavy sanctions possibly possess a weapon considered the pinnacle of modern military technology? And if it were true, then the rules of the game had changed. This was no longer just a contest among nation-states. The balance of power was now tilting into the hands of non-state armed groups, driven by ambition, fueled by vengeance, and now, terrifyingly, armed with devastating capabilities. The answer to the sudden appearance of the Palestine II missile doesn't lie in Yemen itself, but in Tehran. Because everyone understands, no matter how audacious the Houthis may be, they could never develop a hypersonic weapon on their own. The scorched fragments of the missile, its flight path, its materials, all bore the unmistakable signature of Iranian technology. And when a militant group publicly launches a missile traveling multiple times the speed of sound, aimed directly at the heart of Israel's aviation hub, it's more than just retaliation. It's a deliberate message. We can reach your core anytime we choose. Ben Gurion International Airport, long regarded as one of the most secure aviation facilities in the world, became a real target for the first time. Though Israel downplayed the missile's impact, claiming minimal damage and highlighting the Iron Dome's successful interception, the true effect ran deeper, psychologically. A near miss was all it took to plant seeds of fear. Thousands of passengers were evacuated, flights were suspended, and across the country, Israelis began to ask, if a small militant group can pull this off, what happens when a global power decides to strike? The Palestine II missile didn't need to level a city. Its mere existence was enough. For the first time in history, a non-state actor, not a sovereign state, had deployed hypersonic weapons in actual combat. This was no longer an exclusive domain of military superpowers. That barrier had been breached, and the fallout left world leaders visibly unsettled. The most terrifying aspect wasn't the physical damage. It was the collapse of the boundary between sovereign nation and uncontrolled armed group. From the moment the Houthis released footage of their missile launch, the world understood. The game had changed. No one could assume anymore that only great powers held the magic wand. A new stage of asymmetrical warfare had begun, where the weak could now reach directly into the lifeblood of the strong. And amid that chaos, another strike, quieter yet far more shocking, took place. While global attention was still fixated on Palestine II, smoke was rising from Evin prison in Tehran, a site once considered untouchable, a symbol of repression, surveillance, and fear. A door no one dared to knock on, now blown open with chilling precision. No one expected Israel to target Evin. That facility wasn't just home to political prisoners. It was also a data center, a base for Iran's security services, and a nerve center for sensitive intelligence coordination. But Tel Aviv did it. Not with a carpet-bombing blitz, but with a strike calculated down to the square meter, each explosion hitting command rooms, control hubs, key terminals. A message was sent loud and clear. We know what you're hiding, and we can take it whenever we want. At Evin, Israel shattered something even more valuable than infrastructure, the sense of invincibility held by Iran's ruling elite. And what drove them to choose such a bold target? That's the question we'll dive deeper into in the next segment. Evin prison is not just a prison, it's a symbol, a place where thousands of political prisoners are held, a notorious interrogation center, a vault of memories where screams never escaped its walls, but echoed in the fears of an entire generation. To the international community, Evin is the clearest representation of how the Tehran regime treats dissenting voices. But in Israel's eyes, Evin is more than that. It is a nerve center for Iran's intelligence network, a crossroads of classified data, key personnel, and dark plans crafted in the shadows. So when Israeli missiles struck Evin, no one believed it was a mistake. Every target within the compound, from the data management center to the senior administrative quarters, was hit with such precision it bordered on merciless. This wasn't carpet bombing, this wasn't a show of force, it was a surgical strike. And the message sent wasn't just, "We know what you're doing." It was also, even the place you believe is safest is no longer a place where you can hide. 71 people were killed, including mid-level officials, technical staff, doctors, and even children, sons and daughters of those living within the compound. It was a brutal price. But in the cold logic of strategic warfare, that cost wasn't about inflicting casualties. It was about shattering an illusion that Iran still had control over its secret spaces, that Israel wouldn't dare cross a so-called moral boundary. And then Iran chose silence. No response, no condemnation, no vow of retaliation. That silence, if you listen closely, wasn't a sign of calm. It was a signal of disarray, when a command center is suddenly obliterated in the heart of the capital, right as the world watches every move. Evin, with all its symbolism and inner workings, became a strike to the innermost heart of Iran's security apparatus. And in the shadowy world of intelligence, when information leaks, when truths are exposed, when internal trust collapses, that is the kind of damage no body count can quantify. Modern warfare is no longer just about tanks and fighter jets. It's about striking at symbols, at psychology, at the architecture of trust. And in that arena, Israel moved a step ahead. But they are not the only ones who understand this. Thousands of kilometers away in Europe, another war, once seen as a conventional military clash, is morphing into something more sophisticated, the UAV war. And in Ukraine, the clearest proof of 21st century conflict has emerged. That with just $200,000 and a few low-cost drones, a resource-poor nation can paralyze the military aviation of a powerhouse like Russia. A strike with no heavy artillery, no massive firepower, but one that triggers a chain reaction, forcing an entire system to pause, reassess, and worry. There were no massive explosions, no tanks, no special forces, no barrage of artillery fire, just small UAVs screaming through the night, slipping across borders, and then silence. But by morning, all of Russia awoke with a sense of unease. Over 30,000 passengers stranded at airports, nearly 200 flights canceled or indefinitely delayed, and air traffic control stations forced to suspend operations for emergency sweeps. All because of a few drones built with off-the-shelf components, costing less than $200,000 in total. That was Ukraine's strike. And without a single bullet hitting the ground, Ukraine proved that modern warfare doesn't have to be expensive to be effective. It only takes the right moment, the right target, and the right psychological pressure. These UAV attacks weren't just meant to disrupt. They pierced through Russia's confidence, a confidence Moscow had fought desperately to preserve throughout the war. People weren't afraid of drones in the sky. They were afraid because their state had lost control. One UAV entered their airspace, then two, then five. Then five. It wasn't about technology, it was about national pride. And the more troubling question, what if those drones had carried real explosives? What if they were aimed at power plants, data centers, or even civilian targets? What then? Warfare is no longer measured in defense budgets. It now lives in imagination and boldness. And Ukraine has leveraged that reality to flip the battlefield, transforming from the invaded into the side that keeps its adversary awake at night. But the game doesn't stop there, because while the West focuses its energy on the Ukrainian front, a quieter and far more dangerous development is unfolding in Asia. China, whose ambitions over Taiwan have never faded, is calculating every move. And the worrying part is, if Beijing chooses to act, it may not act alone. The NATO Secretary General issued a rare, blunt warning. If China strikes Taiwan, there's a strong possibility that at the same time, Russian President Vladimir Putin will move in Europe, creating a dual-front scenario designed to splinter NATO. One spear thrust into East Asia, another twisting into Eastern Europe. And in that strategic setup, even the United States, powerful as it is, would be forced to split its forces, its focus, and its resources. This is no longer a hypothetical. It's a scenario Western strategists are now quietly preparing for. And in the next segment, we'll take a closer look at why China, quietly backed by Russia, is methodically setting the board, and what could unfold if both powers choose to open the most dangerous game of the century at the same time. The Taiwan Strait, a narrow stretch of water carrying the weight of global strategy, has become a place where the world holds its breath. Behind the shadows of military drills, beneath Beijing's hesitant yet firm statements, a scenario is coming into focus. China may act, not with words, but with boots on the ground. Not to threaten, but to unify, by their own definition. What worries the West isn't just China's military power, it's the cold, calculated nature of its planning. Beijing doesn't strike out of emotion or impulse. It watches, remembers, and waits for the moment when the world is most distracted. And right now, with the Middle East in turmoil, Ukraine still aflame, and US elections pulling global attention inward, this may be the golden window for Beijing to make its move. Recent intelligence reports show that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, has maintained a high state of combat readiness for months. Amphibious assault ships have been deployed near the strait. Live fire exercises simulate island seizures. Training sessions even include control of civilian ports, all signaling preparation not just for show, but for real conflict. If one day hundreds of Chinese missiles launch simultaneously toward Taipei, the world cannot say it wasn't warned. But the greatest danger doesn't lie in China alone. It lies in its potential to act in tandem with Russia. A dual-front scenario, as strategists call it, is NATO's ultimate nightmare. While the US rushes to defend its Asian allies, Russia could seize the opportunity to escalate pressure in Europe, perhaps even opening a new front, forcing NATO to divide its forces, its focus, and its resolve. It's a tactic seen in World War II, when one side pushed from Western Europe and the other struck the East, stretching defenses to the brink. That's why when the NATO Secretary General issued a rare, direct warning about a possible China-Russia coordination, it wasn't speculation. It was data-backed analysis. Today's Russia, despite sanctions, is producing artillery shells at 3 times the rate of all NATO countries combined. From Moscow to the Urals, defense factories run around the clock. And that output isn't just for Ukraine. It may well be stockpiled for a future, broader conflict set in motion the moment Beijing gives the signal. The United States, the only power capable of countering both China and Russia simultaneously, is now facing a strategic puzzle not seen since the Cold War. One hand is tied to Taiwan, the other to NATO. But if both flashpoints ignite at once, will Washington be able to respond effectively, especially when it faces internal divisions, an approaching election, and eroding international confidence? The most dangerous aspect of the two-front disruption strategy isn't the military strike, it's the psychology, to exhaust the world, to make democracies question, is this sacrifice still worth it? To make America's allies in Europe and Asia hesitate before taking any stand. And if that hesitation spreads, if confidence erodes, then half the war is already won, even before a single bullet is fired in Taiwan or Poland. China understands this well, and it's playing the long game. It doesn't need to strike first. It only needs to let the world stay scattered long enough, busy enough, doubtful enough. Then, when the moment comes, the blow will fall from both directions, like 2 jaws of a massive trap snapping shut. And by then, response won't be a choice. It'll be survival. In that scenario, the question isn't who's right, who's wrong. It's who will still be standing at the very end. And once again, the world stands at a fateful crossroads, where it's not morality, but readiness and strength that will determine what future lies ahead. A missile launched from a remote desert, yet its echo didn't stop at Yemen's borders. It traveled far across the Red Sea, shaking Tel Aviv, resonating in Washington, rippling through Brussels, and drawing silent scrutiny from Beijing. One missile, physically small but symbolically massive, opened the door to possibilities no one dared imagine. That modern war needs no declaration, no uniforms, and obeys no moral limits. At the same time, a prison was reduced to rubble. Not because it was a detention center, but because it was a symbol of power, a vault of data, secrets, and key links in the security apparatus of an increasingly isolated regime. When Evin prison went up in flames, it wasn't just an airstrike. It was Israel redrawing the red line. Wherever you hide something, we'll come for it. There are no safe havens left for shadow power. Elsewhere, an airport was paralyzed by a handful of UAVs. No gunfire, no casualties, but the fallout was a seismic blow to public confidence. Bewildered passengers canceled flights, missed calls. Suddenly, everyday Russians felt it for the first time. War is no longer something that only happens on TV. It has crept into daily life, quietly yet hauntingly. The world today no longer runs on the logic of morality, but on the logic of strategy. No one is immune. Nowhere is truly safe. The gray zones of diplomacy, the vague statements, the drawn-out negotiations, they're becoming obsolete in the face of hypersonic missiles and the power to spread chaos with just a few $100,000. We are living in an era where every nation, big or small, must choose. Choose a side, choose a stance, and above all, choose the right moment. Because a delayed choice, a single misstep, can become an irreversible loss. If you found this content valuable, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next sharp, in-depth analysis. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.